Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Party Begins. The spring evening lay soft and golden over the rolling lawns of Ashcombe Manor. The estate, with its grey stone facade and proud chimneys, had stood for more than a century as a symbol of wealth and continuity. Tonight, however, its grandeur was adorned with a more festive touch. Lanterns strung between the trees cast little pools of light across the gravel drive. The wide French doors of the drawing room had been thrown open, and music, laughter, and the gentle clink of glass drifted out into the mild April air. Hercule Poirot, invited by Lady Ashcombe herself, arrived precisely at 7:30. His punctuality was, as always, a matter of principle. He was small and neat in stature, his suit of the finest cut, his moustaches waxed to perfection. To Poirot, order was not only a habit but an expression of respect to himself, to others, and to the event he graced with his presence. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot!" Lady Ashcombe greeted him with warm civility at the top of the marble steps. She was a striking woman in her early 50s, her bearing regal but softened by genuine kindness. "We are so honored that you accepted our invitation. Eleanor was quite delighted when she heard you might attend." Poirot inclined his head. "It is I who am honored, madam. A family celebration, such as this, is always a charming thing, n'est-ce pas?" Lady Ashcombe smiled, though a trace of weariness lingered in her eyes. Poirot noticed it, as he noticed all things, but said nothing. Instead, he allowed himself to be led into the great hall where coats and hats were taken by an efficient butler. From there, they passed into the grand drawing room where the party had already gathered. The company numbered about 30, all acquaintances of the Ashcombe family. There were the expected figures of respectability, business partners, family friends, and distant relatives. Poirot's eye, however, was quick to pick out the variations in character that such gatherings inevitably revealed. On a chaise near the fireplace lounged Charles Ashcombe, cousin to Eleanor. His dark hair was slicked back, and his posture conveyed an air of entitlement touched with laziness. His conversation was loud and meant to impress, though his audience seemed more politely tolerant than captivated. Near the piano stood Mrs. Denham, a widow of some fashion, her gown just slightly too dazzling for a country birthday party. Her eyes, sharp and acquisitive, travelled frequently to the display table at the centre of the room, where a velvet case lay waiting to be unveiled. Poirot noted the intensity of her interest with a flicker of amusement. At the far side of the room, Eleanor Ashcombe herself circulated among the guests. She was a handsome young woman of 21, with auburn hair and a natural charm that drew admiration easily. She greeted each guest with warmth, yet her gaze darted now and then toward the velvet case as though she both longed for and dreaded the moment it would be opened. Poirot, after making his bow to the young lady, allowed himself to drift through the crowd. He observed without intruding, his ears attuned to the tones of voices, his eyes to the smallest gestures. He saw how Charles avoided Eleanor's gaze, how Mrs. Denham leaned forward eagerly whenever the necklace was mentioned, how one of the maids, young Alice, by name, moved nervously among the guests, her tray trembling slightly as she offered champagne. "Tell me, Poirot," said Colonel Beauchamp, a bluff man of military bearing who had taken him in hand, "do you enjoy these sorts of gatherings? Rather tame compared to the sort of cases you're usually about." Poirot smiled. "But mon colonel, life is not only the chase of the criminal. There is also the joy of society, the observation of human nature, and, above all, the birthday of a young lady. Do you not agree?" The colonel chuckled. "Human nature, eh? I dare say there's plenty of that on show tonight." The evening advanced with the usual merriment. The orchestra played light waltzes, couples danced while others looked on. Servants moved discreetly with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Poirot, sipping his cordial, continued his quiet survey. To him, each face was a puzzle piece, each remark a clue. Though no crime had yet disturbed the evening, Poirot's mind was ever alert, as sharp in leisure as in work. At 8:30, Lady Ashcombe called for attention. "My dear friends," she said, her voice clear over the fading notes of the music, "it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to celebrate Eleanor's coming of age. As you know, it is tradition in our family to pass on a certain treasure at this moment. May I ask Eleanor to join me?" All eyes turned to Eleanor, who stepped forward with a smile that wavered just slightly. Her mother lifted the velvet case from the table and, with a small flourish, opened it. A collective murmur rose from the guests. Inside lay a necklace of extraordinary beauty, a string of diamonds, each perfectly matched, catching the light and scattering it in bright sparks across the room. It was not simply valuable, it was historic, bearing the weight of generations of Ashcombe women. "Magnificent," breathed Mrs. Denham, almost to herself. Poirot, standing a little apart, observed Eleanor's face. There was pride, yes, but also something else, a shadow of anxiety, as if the weight of inheritance pressed more heavily upon her than the glittering stones themselves. The guests crowded closer, admiring, exclaiming. Charles leaned forward with a sardonic smile. "Quite the fortune around your neck, Eleanor. One hopes you take care of it." The remark earned him a disapproving glance from Lady Ashcombe, but Eleanor laughed lightly, brushing it aside. The necklace was clasped about her throat, and she turned for all to see. The diamonds flashed brilliantly against her skin. Glasses were raised, toasts made. For a few moments, joy and splendor filled the room, and the air seemed alive with light. Yet Poirot, ever sensitive, detected undercurrents. The envious glance from Charles, the hungry admiration from Mrs. Denham, the maid Alice shrinking into the shadows as if fearful of something unseen. He told himself he was imagining shadows where none existed. And yet, deep within, his little grey cell stirred. A treasure so valuable, displayed so openly, surrounded by so many varying desires, it was a stage upon which fate might choose to play a drama. But Poirot smiled to himself, smoothing his moustaches. For now, it was enough to observe. After all, the evening had only just begun. Chapter 2, A Sudden Cry. The orchestra had just begun a lively foxtrot when the momentary hush following the necklace's presentation lifted. Guests resumed their chatter, champagne glasses clinked, and the young danced while the elder looked on with indulgent amusement. Eleanor, resplendent in her heirloom, smiled dutifully as congratulations poured forth, though her fingers occasionally brushed the diamonds at her throat as though to reassure herself of their presence. Poirot, ever the observer, noted this nervous gesture. To him, it spoke volumes. A treasure such as that, glittering so ostentatiously, was both a gift and a burden. Already he could see the covetous eyes that followed it, the whispers exchanged behind raised fans, the faint flicker of envy in the cousin Charles's gaze. "Do you not find," said Poirot softly to Lady Ashcombe, who had drawn near, "that such displays, though beautiful, invite also the danger?" She gave a small sigh. "I confess, Monsieur Poirot, I had reservations about bringing it forth. But tradition in this family weighs heavily, and Eleanor insisted she would rather wear it for the evening than lock it away. After all, what use is beauty if no one beholds it?" "Indeed," murmured Poirot. "Yet beauty has often been the undoing of men, and of women too." Before Lady Ashcombe could reply, a small commotion at the far side of the room drew their attention. Alice, the young maid, had stumbled, nearly overturning her tray of glasses. She bent hurriedly, cheeks flushed, as a guest helped steady her. Eleanor, noticing, moved across the room to offer a word of reassurance. Poirot watched keenly, the kindness of Eleanor, the fluster of the girl, and, the brief gleam of relief in her eyes when Eleanor touched her arm. Interesting. The moment passed, and the music rose again. But scarcely half an hour later, just as the clock in the hall chimed 9, an incident occurred that altered the atmosphere in an instant. The lights had dimmed slightly to enhance the glow of the lanterns outside, and Eleanor, flushed from dancing, had excused herself for a moment. She returned not long after, her hair a little loosened from the exertion, her hand pressed against her throat. At first, no one noticed the change. Then, in a voice sharp with shock, she cried, "The necklace! It is gone!" The music ceased in a jarring crash as the pianist struck a wrong note and froze. A ripple of disbelief passed through the company. For one suspended second, silence reigned. Then came the cries of astonishment, the exclamations of horror. Lady Ashcombe rushed to her daughter's side, her face blanched. "What do you mean, gone?" she demanded, clutching Eleanor by the shoulders. "You were wearing it not 10 minutes ago." Eleanor's voice trembled. I felt suddenly lighter. I thought perhaps the clasp had come loose. But when I touched my throat, nothing. It has vanished. Poirot stepped forward, his small figure commanding attention at once. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said calmly, "I must request that no one leave this room. The doors must be closed immediately." His authority brooked no delay. The butler obeyed, shutting and locking the great double doors that led into the hall. Servants were instructed to guard the terrace entrance. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The realization struck, the thief must still be among them. Charles Ashcombe gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Well, isn't this a pretty business? Perhaps our illustrious detective here will earn his keep." Poirot regarded him with mild amusement. "Monsieur, you may be sure Hercule Poirot will earn it, and more." Lady Ashcombe turned to Poirot, desperation in her eyes. "Monsieur, you must find it. That necklace is irreplaceable." Poirot bowed. "It will be found, madam. But first, we must have order." He stepped into the center of the room, raising his hands. The guests, unsettled, gathered closer. Poirot's voice, though quiet, carried perfectly. "Let us be precise. When was the last moment the necklace was observed?" Several guests spoke at once, but Poirot silenced them with a gesture. Eleanor herself answered, "It was during the dance. I am certain I wore it then." "And afterwards, mademoiselle?" "I went briefly to the powder room." "Alone?" "When I returned, I felt it gone." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "So, it vanished between the dance floor and your return." "The possibilities are few, but already we see the outline, n'est-ce pas?" He began his inquiries with methodical patience. Each guest was asked to describe where they had been in those minutes. Mrs. Denham declared she had remained by the refreshment table, though her eyes had often strayed toward the necklace. The Colonel insisted he had been deep in conversation with the vicar about regimental life. Charles claimed he had stepped into the library to fetch a cigar, an assertion met with skeptical glances, for the butler reported seeing him nowhere near the library at that time. Poirot listened, his head slightly inclined, his gaze missing nothing. He asked few questions, but those he asked pierced directly to the heart. "You did not notice anyone near Eleanor as she returned?" "You heard no sound of metal striking the floor?" Most denied knowledge, but one guest, a timid school teacher, ventured that she had seen a shadow pass close to Eleanor near the terrace. She could not, however, identify the figure. Poirot stroked his moustache. "A shadow? Always there is a shadow when truth conceals itself." He then turned to the servants. Alice, pale and trembling, stammered that she had been clearing glasses near the door and had seen nothing. Poirot's eyes rested on her for a moment longer than necessary, then moved on. The guests, though restless, obeyed Poirot's command to remain calm. He asked Lady Ashcombe to order coffee served, explaining with gentle firmness, "The thief is here among us, yes, but panic will not hasten discovery. On the contrary, it will obscure the truth. We must maintain order, discipline, method." As the guests murmured, Poirot began his examination of the room. He walked slowly, scrutinizing every corner, every chair, every rug. He bent to inspect the space near the refreshment table, straightened a chair that had been oddly displaced, and paused by the terrace doors, where the faintest trace of perfume lingered. He did not speak of it, but filed the observation away. At length, he returned to the centre, his expression serene. "Miss Amos, the necklace has not flown through the air. It has not dissolved into smoke. It is concealed, temporarily, I think, somewhere close by. The thief acts with daring, yes, but also with haste. Already I see certain indications." His words sent a shiver through the assembly. Eleanor sat with her hands clasped, her face pale, while Lady Ashcombe stood protectively behind her. Charles lounged with affected indifference, though the tightness about his jaw betrayed unease. Mrs. Denham, meanwhile, adjusted her gloves with hands that trembled ever so slightly. Poirot gave a little bow. "I shall continue my inquiries. But rest assured, Mesdames et Messieurs, the truth, she has the habit of revealing herself to Hercule Poirot. It is only a matter of patience and of order." The guests murmured, some reassured, others more suspicious than ever. Outside, the night deepened, the lantern swayed gently in the breeze, and inside the grand drawing-room of Ashcombe Manor, the game had truly begun. Chapter 3: Poirot takes command. The atmosphere in the drawing-room had shifted perceptibly. Where once there had been laughter and music, now there was tension, as though the very air had thickened with suspicion. Guests who moments before had exchanged pleasantries now eyed one another with a wary curiosity, each privately wondering, "Is it you? Could you be the thief?" Poirot, standing in the centre of the polished floor, raised a hand for silence. His manner was calm, but the authority in his gaze brooked no disobedience. "Miss Amos," he began, his Belgian accent lending a certain musicality to his words, "we must proceed with method. Disorder is the friend of the criminal. Precision and order, they are the allies of Hercule Poirot. Allow me, then, to direct our efforts." A murmur of assent travelled through the room. Some guests appeared almost relieved. To be under Poirot's command was, after all, a comfort. Others shifted uneasily, as though his very presence suggested that their secrets, whether of theft or of some lesser variety, would soon be exposed. "First," Poirot continued, "the doors are secured. The necklace cannot leave this room unless carried upon a person. The thief, therefore, is here among us." There was a collective intake of breath. Charles Ashcombe gave a dry laugh, which Poirot ignored. "Second, we must establish the facts with clarity. The necklace was last seen upon the person of Mademoiselle Eleanor at approximately 8:45, during the dance. At 9 o'clock, upon her return from the powder room, it was gone. Between those times lies our mystery." Poirot turned to Eleanor. "Mademoiselle, permit me to ask, did you remove the necklace at any moment? Did it trouble you? Did the clasp feel loose?" Eleanor shook her head, her cheeks pale. "No, Monsieur Poirot. I was aware of its weight, yes, but it felt secure. I never unclasped it." "Just so. Then it was taken either by dexterous fingers during the dance, or afterwards, while you were momentarily unobserved. Now, let us examine." Poirot began to circle the room with slow, deliberate steps. His eyes roved across the guests, but also across the physical space, the tables laden with glasses, the chairs slightly askew, the open curtains drifting with the night breeze. Near the refreshments, he paused. A half-filled glass of champagne, abandoned, bore a lipstick stain of deep crimson. Poirot bent, examined it closely, and placed it back upon the tray with delicate fingers. Who, I wonder, he mused aloud, would leave her glass unfinished at such a moment? A lady who departs in haste, perhaps. His eyes flicked briefly toward Mrs. Denham, whose lips were indeed painted the same vivid shade. Mrs. Denham flushed and lifted her chin. Really, Monsieur Poirot? One hardly notices such things in the excitement. Poirot smiled faintly but said nothing. At the far side of the room, near the terrace, a chair sat slightly out of alignment. Poirot straightened it with unnecessary care, then crouched to examine the floor beneath. Rising, he brushed his hands together. And there, he remarked, a faint trace of soil, no? Someone stepped in from the garden, or perhaps leaned too close to the open door. But why? He resumed his progress, noting each detail with an inward satisfaction. To Poirot, every piece of disorder spoke. Human beings, in their haste and folly, left little betrayals of their intent. When he returned to the center, he clasped his hands. Now, I must ask each of you for patience while I hear your movements during this time. I shall not detain you long, but it is essential. One by one, the guests stepped forward. Colonel Beauchamp, bluff and honest, declared he had stood by the fireplace the entire time, deep in conversation. Poirot nodded politely but pressed no further. Mrs. Denham insisted she had remained by the refreshments. I scarcely moved, Monsieur Poirot. I admired the necklace from afar, but I did not touch it. Poirot's eyes twinkled. One admires too much, sometimes, madam. But we shall see. Charles Ashcombe lounged against the mantelpiece, his expression faintly mocking. I was in the library, as I said. Fetching a cigar. Poirot tilted his head. And yet the butler did not see you. Curious, is it not? Charles shrugged. Perhaps he was busy elsewhere. Must I account for every step I take in my own house? Poirot merely inclined his head. But of course, monsieur. It is your privilege. Yet Hercule Poirot is not easily deceived, you understand. Others followed, the timid school teacher, the vicar, a pair of young cousins who could scarcely conceal their excitement at the drama unfolding. Each gave their account, some more convincing than others. Poirot listened, his mind weaving threads together, discarding some, tightening others. Finally, he turned to the servants. The butler, grave and dignified, spoke with clarity. He had remained at the door throughout, ensuring the proper flow of refreshments. The footman corroborated. And then came Alice, the young maid. She stood twisting her apron, her eyes wide with fear. I was clearing glasses, sir. Near the door. I didn't see anything, truly I didn't. Poirot regarded her closely. And yet, mademoiselle, you seemed distressed earlier, when you stumbled with your tray. Why was that, I wonder? Alice blushed crimson. Only nerves, sir. So many fine guests, I was afraid of making a mistake. Poirot let the silence linger, then nodded kindly. Courage, ma petite. It is not a crime to tremble. When all had spoken, Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and addressed the assembly once more. You see, Miss Amos, already we have some contradictions. Monsieur Charles, who claims the library yet is unseen there. Madame Denham, whose lipstick speaks where her words do not. A shadow near the terrace, observed by one guest. And always, the opportunity, so brief, so daring, for fingers quick and bold to unfasten a clasp. The guest stirred uneasily. Charles scowled, Mrs. Denham adjusted her gloves, Eleanor sat rigid, her hands clenched. Poirot, however, appeared serene. But patience. We do not rush to judgment. The necklace cannot have travelled far. It is here, concealed within this very room, or upon the person of one present. We shall uncover it, but we must give time for the truth to reveal itself. For the truth, Mesdames et Messieurs, she has a habit of speaking, if only one listens. He bowed slightly, his moustaches gleaming. An Hercule Poirot, he listens. The words settled like a quiet promise. The guests exchanged glances, some fearful, some defiant. Outside, the wind rustled the garden leaves. Inside, the great detective had set his stage, and the curtain had lifted upon the drama of deduction. The hunt for the necklace had begun in earnest. Chapter 4: Suspicions and Red Herrings. The guests had resumed their seats with a certain stiffness, their gaiety extinguished as thoroughly as if a candle had been snuffed. Coffee was served in delicate china cups, though few touched it. Conversation dwindled to whispers, punctuated by the occasional sharp glance. Poirot, strolling serenely between the groups, might have seemed almost detached, yet in truth his little grey cells were working at full capacity. Suspicion hung in the air like smoke. It was Charles Ashcombe who broke the uneasy silence. "I suppose," he said with a drawl, "that we must all pretend shock, though some here may well be secretly delighted. A necklace like that would fetch a fortune in Bond Street." Eleanor stiffened. "How dare you say such a thing, Charles? This is my inheritance, you speak as if it were already lost." "Merely a practical observation, my dear cousin," Charles replied with a thin smile. "You'll forgive me if I point out the obvious." Poirot regarded him with mild reproach. "Monsieur, to throw suspicion carelessly is not wise. It is like tossing stones in the dark, you may strike the innocent." Lady Ashcombe spoke sharply. "That is enough, Charles. Your flippancy is misplaced." Charles subsided with a shrug, but Poirot noted the flush on his cheeks. Was it annoyance at being rebuked, or the discomfort of a guilty conscience? Across the room, Mrs. Denham fidgeted with her gloves, her eyes never far from the locked doors. She leaned toward a neighbor and whispered audibly, "I always said displaying such a necklace was inviting trouble. I told Eleanor so earlier." Poirot, who had ears attuned to whispers, approached with a courteous bow. "Madam, you are much interested in the necklace, are you not?" Mrs. Denham gave a forced laugh. "Who would not be? It is the most splendid jewel I have ever seen." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "admiration, when too intense, can sometimes resemble desire. And desire, when unchecked, may lead to rash actions." Her eyes widened. "Are you accusing me?" "Not at all, madam," Poirot replied, smiling benignly. "I accuse no one. I only observe. An observation, it tells me you are uneasy." Mrs. Denham sniffed and turned away, but her hand trembled as she lifted her cup. Poirot allowed the moment to pass. He had no wish to press her too far, too soon. Red herrings, after all, swam naturally in such waters. The timid school teacher, Miss Cooper, ventured hesitantly, I did see someone, you know." Near the terrace, when Eleanor returned. "Just a shadow." "It might have been anyone." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Even a shadow, mademoiselle, is valuable. Shadows tell us where the light does not fall. And did this shadow linger, or did it pass quickly?" "I could not say," Miss Cooper admitted. "I was too far away, and I fear I did not wish to stare." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Yet you remembered it. That is already something." The Colonel, impatient, slammed down his cup. "All this chatter about shadows and lipstick, it gets us nowhere. If the thief is here, Poirot, search us all. That will settle the matter." A ripple of alarm passed through the room. To be searched was a humiliating prospect. Eleanor clasped her hands tightly, her face stricken. Poirot raised a calming hand. Non, Colonel." A search now would yield nothing. The thief, being clever, has already concealed the necklace where no pocket inspection would reveal it. No, we must be more subtle. The truth will betray itself if we allow the situation to unfold. The colonel muttered but subsided. Poirot had the gift of commanding even the most forceful personalities. He next turned his attention to the servants. Alice stood near the wall, pale and trembling. Poirot approached gently. "Mademoiselle," he said in a tone of kindness, "you are distressed. Do not be afraid. Tell me, what did you see when you stumbled with your tray earlier?" Alice's lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head. "Nothing, sir. Only, I was clumsy." "Clumsy, yes. But sometimes clumsiness comes when the mind is troubled." "Were you troubled, perhaps?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I cannot say, sir. I dare not." Poirot studied her, then patted her shoulder. "Courage. The truth will set you free. Do not be afraid of it." She fled then, hurrying to the safety of the butler's side. Poirot let her go. She was frightened, yes, but of what? Of guilt, or of something else entirely? The room seemed to close in upon itself with secrets. Guests whispered behind fans, eyes darted suspiciously, the air was thick with mistrust. Poirot, however, walked serenely among them, his mind as neat as his attire. He paused by the velvet display case, still open and empty. He examined the lining with delicate fingers, then nodded to himself. No trace of the necklace remained. Then, with a sudden movement, he reached behind a vase on the mantelpiece and drew forth a small object. The guests gasped. It was a clasp, delicate and glittering, unmistakably part of the necklace. Poirot held it up, his eyes narrowing. Voila! The thief, thinking to mislead, has left us this. But it is too obvious, too conveniently placed. Non, Miss Amiss, this is a false clue. A red herring, as you say in English. A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Mrs. Denham looked triumphant, as though cleared by this new discovery. Charles scowled. Eleanor trembled. Poirot replaced the clasp on the table with exaggerated care. The criminal believes himself clever. He seeks to throw suspicion upon another. But Hercule Poirot, he sees beyond the little tricks. The truth, she is always consistent. The guests shifted uneasily. The atmosphere grew heavier still. Every man and woman felt the invisible finger of suspicion, and each wondered if the great detective's gaze lingered a second too long upon them. At length, Poirot spoke again, his voice firm. Mesdames et messieurs, you must understand, this affair is not yet concluded. The thief is clever, but not clever enough. I will find the necklace. Until then, you must remain calm. Drink your coffee. Speak with one another. Pretend the evening continues as before. His eyes sparkled with quiet confidence. And Hercule Poirot, he will watch. The orchestra, uncertain, resumed a softer tune. Conversation returned in stilted tones. Yet beneath the surface of civility lay fear, suspicion, and the knowledge that somewhere among them sat a thief, calm-faced, waiting for an opportunity. Poirot, hands clasped neatly behind his back, surveyed them all with satisfaction. The net was tightening. The truth, though hidden, could not conceal itself forever. Chapter 5, Clues in the Shadows. The air in the drawing-room was stifling now, thick with perfume, cigar smoke, and the sharp tang of unease. Though the orchestra continued softly, the gaiety was gone. Guests murmured to one another, eyes darting constantly, each word weighed for hidden meaning. The necklace, once a symbol of elegance and tradition, had become a ghostly presence haunting them all. Poirot, calm as ever, strolled the room with his hands neatly folded behind his back. He might have been a professor examining his pupils or a gardener inspecting delicate plants. Each gesture was deliberate, each glance calculated. To the untrained eye, he appeared merely polite, but beneath his courteous manner, his little grey cells worked with relentless precision. Order, always order, he murmured to himself in French. In chaos, the mind must impose symmetry. That is how the truth reveals itself. He paused first at the terrace doors. They stood ajar, the curtains stirring gently in the night breeze. The scent of roses and trimmed hedges drifted in. Poirot knelt carefully, his knees protesting only slightly. On the polished wooden floor, just inside the threshold, lay a faint smear of soil, no larger than a coin. "Ah," he whispered, brushing it delicately with his fingertip. So, someone was here. But who? And why, when all the world was watching Eleanor dance? He looked out into the garden. The lantern still glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the stone terrace. To step outside during the height of the festivities would have been unusual, noticeable. Unless, of course, one hoped not to be noticed at all. Poirot rose, smoothing his suit. His eyes lingered on the curtains, where the faintest trace of scent clung, rosewater, perhaps. A common perfume, but one he had detected earlier, near the chair by the refreshments. His moustaches twitched. He turned back to the company, who watched him with barely disguised anxiety. "Miss Amis," he announced softly, "a crime leaves traces. Always. Even the most careful thief cannot help but disturb the natural order. Here, a chair is moved, there, a trace of soil. It is like a whisper, it tells us something, if we will but listen." Lady Ashcombe clasped her daughter's hand, her face pale. "Do you mean to say the thief went outside, Monsieur Poirot?" "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "Or perhaps they only wished it to appear so. We must not be too hasty." He resumed his tour of the room. At the refreshment table, he paused again. The abandoned glass with its crimson lipstick stain remained in place. Poirot studied it closely, then leaned down to inspect the tray beneath. A faint circle of condensation marked the polished surface, but oddly, no trace of spilt champagne. "Curious," he murmured. "One leaves a glass half full, still cool, and yet departs in haste. Was it excitement? Or guilt?" Mrs. Denham, watching from across the room, shifted uncomfortably. Poirot's eyes flicked toward her, then moved on. He would not reveal his conclusions prematurely. Near the mantelpiece, where the false clue, the necklace clasp, had been planted, Poirot bent once more. He examined the vase beside which it had been found. The dust beneath was disturbed, the surface of the marble faintly smudged, as though a hand had rested there clumsily. He smiled faintly. A clever thief, he thought, but one who believes too much in cleverness. The true trick is to leave no trick at all. As he straightened, his gaze caught another detail, so small, so insignificant to anyone else that they would never have noticed. The edge of the carpet near the fireplace bore a tiny snag, as though someone's heel had caught in it. A trivial accident, yes, but occurring in the exact corner where Charles had been lounging with studied indifference. Poirot's eyes gleamed. He turned his attention next to the servants. The butler and footman remained solemn, but Alice, the young maid, looked near collapse. Her apron strings twisted tighter and tighter in her nervous hands. Poirot approached gently, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Mademoiselle," he said kindly, "you are afraid. But is it of guilt, or of something else? Tell me, what troubles you?" Her eyes filled with tears. I dare not, sir." "Dare not?" Poirot repeated softly. "Then you have seen something, n'est-ce pas? Something you believe dangerous to speak." Alice bit her lip, shaking her head violently. Poirot sighed, then patted her hand. Courage, ma petite. The truth will free you. Remember that. He left her trembling but thoughtful. Fear often loosened the tongue in time. Poirot returned to the center of the room, drawing all eyes once more. He spoke calmly, yet with an authority that commanded attention. Mesdames et messieurs, I have now made certain observations. A shadow near the terrace, a trace of soil upon the floor, an abandoned glass, a false clasp placed to mislead. These things may seem trivial, but they are not. They are the breadcrumbs the thief has left behind. A ripple of unease travelled through the company. Charles muttered something under his breath, while Mrs. Denham pursed her lips. Eleanor sat rigid, her eyes fixed on Poirot as though he alone could restore her peace. Poirot continued. It is also clear to me that the thief has sought to confuse us with deliberate misdirection. To place a clasp behind a vase, for instance, that is too obvious. It is the action of one who wishes suspicion to fall upon another. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily deceived. The Colonel harumphed. Then you know who it is already. Poirot smiled thinly. Not yet, Colonel. But I am beginning to see the shape of the truth. Like a puzzle, the pieces are assembling. Soon, very soon, the picture will be clear. He let his words settle, watching carefully the reactions they provoked. Mrs. Denham's hand trembled as she lifted her cup. Charles glared defiantly, though his jaw was tight. Alice lowered her gaze, fighting tears. Each betrayed more in silence than they would ever confess aloud. At last, Poirot clasped his hands behind his back and bowed slightly. For tonight, we must continue as though nothing is amiss. But know this, the thief is among us, and Hercule Poirot is watching. Already, the shadows yield their secrets. Soon, the necklace will be found, and the truth revealed. He turned toward Eleanor, his gaze gentle. Take courage, mademoiselle. You will not lose what is yours by right. The diamonds will return to your throat, but only after they have revealed to us the heart of the thief who dared to take them. The orchestra struck a new chord, but few danced. The guests remained subdued, caught between fear and fascination. And Poirot, small and neat and serene, surveyed them all with the satisfaction of a man who knew the game was advancing exactly as it should. The thief, he thought, was already ensnared, though they did not yet know it. Chapter 6: The Net Tightens. Though the orchestra continued to play softly, the spirit of festivity had utterly drained away. The drawing-room, with its polished floor and gilded mirrors, now resembled less a place of celebration than a cage in which a trapped animal paced. Guests spoke in hushed tones, avoiding one another's eyes, afraid that even an idle word might later be turned into a weapon. At the center of it all, Hercule Poirot moved with his usual deliberate grace. His posture was immaculate, his moustaches impeccable, his manner courteous. Yet beneath that calm exterior, his eyes glittered with a sharp, unrelenting focus. He was, to borrow his own words, conducting a little experiment in psychology. Miss Amos, he said, raising his voice gently, it is time to observe not only the facts, but the hearts. The thief, he has left traces, yes, but also he betrays himself in manner, in gesture, in the psychology. Permit me to show you. He turned first toward Charles Ashcombe. Monsieur, you have been quick to jest, to belittle the gravity of this affair. But beneath the flippancy lies resentment, is it not so? Resentment toward your cousin, who inherits what you do not. Charles bristled. Really, Poirot, you make it sound as though I wished Eleanor ill. I have no need of her necklace, or her fortune. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Perhaps not. And yet, your heel has caught in the carpet near the fireplace, leaving its mark. You were restless, shifting. Why? Were you uneasy, or merely careless? The young man flushed, then laughed too loudly. You imagine phantoms, sir. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps. But even phantoms may leave footprints. He next approached Mrs. Denham, who sat rigid, her gloved hands tightly clasped in her lap. Madam, you admire beauty, you enjoy fine jewels. That is natural. But your lipstick, it speaks against you. A glass abandoned in haste, a mark left behind, these are small things, but they have weight. Mrs. Denham gave a sharp laugh. So now it is a crime to drink champagne? Really, Monsieur Poirot, if I had wished to take the necklace, would I not have had the sense to finish my glass first? A murmur of amusement rippled through the company, but Poirot did not smile. On the contrary, madam. It is often in haste, in excitement, that one forgets the details. One cannot think of lipstick when one's mind is consumed with diamonds. Mrs. Denham's face paled beneath her rouge, but she said no more. Poirot allowed the silence to settle before turning toward the servants. Alice, the maid, stood twisting her apron until it was knotted into a rope. Her eyes were wide with fear, her lips trembling. Mademoiselle Alice, Poirot said gently, you are afraid. But not, I think, because you stole the necklace. No, you have seen something, n'est-ce pas? Something that frightens you. Why do you not speak? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I can't, sir, she whispered. It isn't safe. A collective gasp spread through the room. Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. Safe, my child? You are among friends. Speak the truth, and you will have my protection. But Alice shook her head violently and buried her face in her apron. The butler placed a protective hand on her shoulder, glaring at Poirot as if to say the girl had been questioned enough. Poirot let it pass, for now. He returned to the center of the room, folding his arms behind his back. His voice, calm and precise, carried to every corner. You see, Miss Amos, the circle is tightening. The thief grows anxious. Already, he has sought to mislead us with a false clasp, planted behind the vase. Already, he has tried to cast shadows upon others. But in his cleverness, he has been too clever. Each attempt at deception is itself a confession. Colonel Beecham growled. Then stop talking in riddles, Poirot, and name the scoundrel. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not yet, Colonel. To name too soon is to risk injustice. We must allow the net to close of its own accord. The guilty, when pressed, will reveal themselves. And pressed they were. Poirot contrived, with quiet brilliance, to keep his suspects on edge. He asked questions in casual tones, yet each cut sharply. He remarked upon trifles, a smudge on a glove, a glance exchanged, a pause too long before an answer, and left his remarks hanging like silent accusations. Charles paced the room, his steps too quick, his laughter too forced. Mrs. Denham fluttered her fan with unnecessary vigor, her eyes darting constantly to the locked doors. Alice wept quietly, torn between terror and the urge to unburden herself. Even Eleanor, though innocent, sat pale and trembling, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Poirot, meanwhile, remained the picture of serenity. He poured himself a coffee, stirred it delicately, and sipped with evident enjoyment. Excellent, he murmured. Strong, but not bitter. Precisely as it should be. The contrast between his calm and the guest's agitation was stark. It was as though he had become the center of a web, each thread quivering as the trapped flies struggled. At one point, Poirot seated himself beside Lady Ashcombe. Madam, he said softly, forgive me if I observe, you are weary. This evening has been most trying for you. She gave a wan smile. It has, Monsieur Poirot. To think such a thing could happen in my own home, at my daughter's celebration, it breaks my heart. Poirot patted her hand gently. Courage, madam. The honor of your family will not suffer long. The truth, she is close. His words were not merely for her comfort, they were for the ears of the guilty. He saw, out of the corner of his eye, Charles flinch, Mrs. Denham stiffen, Alice glance up quickly in fear. At last, Poirot rose and addressed them all. Mesdames et messieurs, the thief is with us, of that I am certain. The necklace, too, is with us, concealed, but near. I advise you, if you are the guilty one, to confess now. It will be better for you, believe me, than to be exposed by Hercule Poirot. The silence that followed was absolute. One could hear the ticking of the great clock in the hall. Yet no one spoke. Poirot sighed delicately, as though disappointed but not surprised. So. Very well. Then we continue. The night is young, and Hercule Poirot is patient. He smoothed his moustaches and smiled faintly. But remember, Miss Amos, the net tightens. Soon, there will be no escape. The guests shifted uneasily. The room felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thicker. And somewhere among them sat a thief, who now realized that Poirot's calm words were not a promise, but a threat. Chapter 7. Gathering the Guests. The long hands of the clock in the drawing-room crept past 10:30. The gaiety that had once animated the birthday party was now only a memory, replaced by an atmosphere of dread. Even the orchestra had fallen silent at last, the musicians retreating nervously to a corner, their instruments hushed as though they, too, feared to disturb the detective's scrutiny. Poirot, neat as ever, stood at the center of the room. His small frame seemed to command more space than any other presence there. He had been silent for some minutes, pacing with his hands folded behind his back, his head inclined in thought. At last, he stopped and addressed the company. Miss Amos, it is time. The facts, the little clues, the psychology, they are sufficient. I ask you now, all of you, to sit. The guests obeyed, some reluctantly, others with relief. Chairs scraped across the polished floor as they arranged themselves in a wide semicircle. Poirot waited until every face was turned toward him, every eye fixed with fearful fascination. He began softly, almost conversationally. It is in moments such as these, Mesdames et Messieurs, that Hercule Poirot feels most alive. A crime has been committed, yes, but more than that, a drama has been played. Each of you has acted your part, and I am the humble audience who observes. But soon, the curtain must fall, and the truth will be revealed. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the group, quickly stifled. Charles shifted restlessly, his arms crossed. Mrs. Denham smoothed her skirt with unnecessary precision. Alice sat near the butler, her eyes lowered, her fingers entwined so tightly her knuckles whitened. Poirot's gaze moved from one to another, his expression unreadable. Let us examine once more what has occurred. The necklace, a treasure of great value, was displayed to all. Mademoiselle Eleanor wore it, and all admired. Then, in the brief interval of her absence, it vanished. A daring theft, executed with boldness, but also with cunning. He lifted a finger. Immediately, the thief sought to create confusion. A clasp was planted behind a vase. Ah! Very neat, very tidy. But too neat, too tidy. A false clue, Miss Amos, designed to mislead. Such cleverness betrays itself, for it is the action not of innocence but of guilt. The guests murmured. Eleanor clutched her mother's hand, her face pale. Poirot continued, then, there is the matter of the terrace. Soil upon the floor, the curtain stirred, the faint scent of perfume. Someone passed that way, either to escape, or to pretend escape. Which was it? We shall see. He took a step closer to Mrs. Denham, who stiffened visibly. Madam, your glass betrays haste. You left it unfinished, the lipstick fresh upon the rim. Why abandon champagne in the middle of a party? Unless your mind was elsewhere, on diamonds, perhaps. Mrs. Denham flushed scarlet. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was distracted. I admire the necklace, yes, but admiration is not theft. Poirot inclined his head courteously. So you say. Yet admiration, when too strong, may tempt the hand. He turned sharply toward Charles. And you, Monsieur Charles, you tell us you visited the library. Yet the butler did not see you. And near the fireplace, where you lounged so indifferently, the carpet bears the mark of your heel, caught in agitation. Why were you restless, monsieur? Was it guilt? Charles's eyes blazed. This is outrageous. Are we to be judged on scuffed carpets and spilt drinks? If you suspect me, say it outright. I'm not afraid of your insinuations. Poirot raised a placating hand. Patience, monsieur. I accuse no one, not yet. I only lay before you the contradictions. The guilty man or woman will betray themselves when faced with truth. He paused, his eyes softening as they fell on Alice. And then there is our little maid. Poor child, you tremble still. You saw something, did you not? Something that frightens you. Alice's lips moved, but no sound came. She shook her head violently, tears brimming in her eyes. Poirot nodded gently. It is difficult, I know. But the truth will set you free. Remember that. The silence in the room deepened, each guest frozen under the detective's quiet pressure. At last, Poirot clasped his hands and addressed them all once more. You see, Miss Amos, the thief has been clever, yes, but not clever enough. Each false clue, each attempt at misdirection, has only tightened the circle. The psychology, she does not lie. The guilty heart cannot mask itself forever. The colonel, red-faced and impatient, burst out, Enough of this, Poirot. You've toyed with us long enough. Who is it? Who stole the necklace? Poirot's moustaches twitched with amusement. Ah, the impatience of the soldier. But a general does not rush his battle, Colonel. He waits until the moment is perfect. And so must I. One more piece, one final test, and the truth will stand revealed. The guests leaned forward, breath held. Poirot, serene, moved once more around the circle, his gaze sharp as a blade. He stopped behind Eleanor, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mademoiselle, forgive me. You have suffered much tonight. But take heart, the honor of your family, the safety of your heirloom, they will be restored. Already, the necklace is within reach. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You truly believe you can find it, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot bowed slightly. I do not believe, mademoiselle. I know. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the room. Tomorrow, at dawn, if need be, I will reveal the thief. But I think, Miss Amos, the guilty one will not sleep tonight. Already, the net is closed. Already, the truth trembles upon the brink. The guests exchanged uneasy glances. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Poirot, immaculate and composed, looked every inch the master of the stage, his drama nearly complete. Go now, he said softly. Rest, if you can. But remember, Hercule Poirot sees all, hears all, knows all. And tomorrow, the denouement. With that, he bowed slightly, his moustaches gleaming in the firelight. The guests rose slowly, reluctantly dispersing, each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears. And Poirot, left alone for a moment, smiled to himself. It is nearly finished. The thief believes himself safe, but already he is caught. Tomorrow, I draw the curtain. And then, the truth, she will stand revealed. Chapter 8, The Truth Revealed. Morning dawned pale and cold over Ashcombe Manor. The lawns glistened with dew, the roses hung heavy with moisture, and the great house, usually so serene, seemed restless after the night's unease. Guests had slept little. Some had lain awake fearing discovery, others fretted about their reputation should suspicion fall upon them. At precisely 10 o'clock, Hercule Poirot summoned all to the grand salon. They came reluctantly, yet obediently, compelled by the gravity of his presence. Eleanor entered leaning upon her mother's arm, her face pale but resolute. Charles sauntered in with feigned indifference, though dark circles betrayed his sleepless night. Mrs. Denham arrived fashionably late, her gown impeccable, but her hands trembled slightly as she removed her gloves. Alice, the young maid, followed the butler, her eyes swollen from weeping. Poirot stood waiting, immaculate as ever, his moustaches gleaming in the morning light. When all had taken their places, he bowed slightly. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "thank you for your patience. You have endured much. But at last, the drama reaches its conclusion. The necklace will be restored, and the guilty revealed." A hush fell over the room. All eyes fixed upon him. Poirot walked slowly before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his words deliberate and precise. "Let us begin with what we know. The necklace was last seen upon Mademoiselle Eleanor at approximately 8:45. By 9, it had vanished. No stranger could have entered, the thief is one of us. That is certain." He raised a finger. Immediately, the thief attempted misdirection. A clasp, placed behind a vase. Too convenient. Too obvious. This, Miss Amos, is what we call a red herring. A false trail to throw suspicion upon another. But in creating such a trick, the thief betrayed their own anxiety. Only the guilty invent false evidence. His gaze swept the room. Mrs. Denham shifted in her seat. Charles looked away, whistling tunelessly under his breath. Next, Poirot continued, "We consider the terrace. Soil upon the floor, curtains disturbed, the faint trace of rosewater perfume. What does this tell us? That someone wished it to appear they had fled through the garden. Yet no footprints, no crushed grass, no real sign of escape was found. Again, a trick. A pretense of departure. The thief never left this room." There was a murmur of astonishment. Poirot pressed on, his eyes alight with certainty. "Then there is the matter of psychology. Monsieur Charles, you resent your cousin, do you not? Her inheritance, her fortune, it galls you. Your alibi of the library was false. The butler did not see you. Near the fireplace, the carpet was snagged by your heel. These are facts." Yet, Poirot paused dramatically, resentment alone is not theft. "You are careless, yes, but not cunning enough to plant false clues. You are ruled out." Charles let out a sharp breath of relief, though his pride was clearly wounded by Poirot's assessment. Poirot turned to Mrs. Denham. "Madam, your lipstick betrayed you. A glass abandoned, a haste unusual. You admire jewels, yes. You even coveted this one, perhaps. But you are too visible, too obvious. A thief requires not only desire but stealth. And you, madam, are not stealthy." Mrs. Denham colored, but lifted her chin defiantly. "I told you I admired it, nothing more." "Just so," Poirot replied smoothly. He then looked toward Alice. The girl shrank back, twisting her apron. Poirot's voice softened. "Mademoiselle Alice, you feared to speak. But your fear was not guilt. No, you feared another. You saw something, did you not?" Alice nodded faintly, tears brimming. "Yes, sir. I saw her. Near the curtain. She hid something there. Gasps filled the room. Eleanor's face drained of colour. Poirot lifted his hand for silence. Courage, child. You have done well. And now, Miss Amis, we come to the heart of the matter. He turned slowly, facing Eleanor Ashcombe. She sat rigid, her mother's hand clasped tightly in her own. Poirot's gaze was kind, but unflinching. Mademoiselle Eleanor, it was you. A stunned silence followed. Lady Ashcombe cried out, Poirot. Surely you cannot mean my daughter. Poirot inclined his head gravely. But yes, madam. Your daughter. She staged the theft herself. All eyes swung to Eleanor. She shook her head violently. No. That's impossible. I was the victim. Poirot's voice was calm, almost gentle. Permit me to explain. From the very first, mademoiselle, your anxiety betrayed you. You touched the necklace repeatedly, as though it weighed upon you. Not pride, but unease. You did not wish it. To you, it was not a symbol of love, but of obligation. The inheritance, the expectation, it crushed you. Eleanor's lips trembled. That's not true. But it is, Poirot said softly. You slipped away to the powder room, yes, but not alone. You carried the necklace in your hand. There, you unclasped it yourself, concealing it in the folds of the curtain upon your return. You arranged the false clasp behind the vase, knowing suspicion would fall elsewhere. A clever plan, mademoiselle. Too clever. He moved to the window and, with a swift motion, drew back the heavy curtain. From a hidden fold of fabric, he produced the necklace, its diamonds glittering in the morning light. A collective cry rose from the guests. Poirot held it delicately between finger and thumb. Voila! Hidden here all along, where you could retrieve it later. But you had not counted on Hercule Poirot noticing the faint scent of rosewater perfume at the window. Your perfume, mademoiselle. Not Mrs. Denham's. Not anyone else's. Yours. Eleanor covered her face with her hands. Lady Ashcombe gasped, torn between horror and pity. Poirot spoke gently now, almost sadly. You did not wish to steal it, no. You wished only to escape it. To rid yourself of the burden. But in doing so, you deceived your guests, alarmed your mother, and brought suspicion upon the innocent. That, mademoiselle, is unforgivable. Tears slid down Eleanor's cheeks. I didn't want it. The necklace, the inheritance, it feels like a chain around my neck. I thought if it disappeared, perhaps I could be free. Lady Ashcombe drew her daughter into her arms, weeping quietly. The guests sat in stunned silence. Poirot bowed. The truth, she is not always pleasant. But she must be told. Here is your necklace, Madame Ashcombe. Guard it well. And perhaps, guard also the heart of your daughter, who bears more weight than she can carry. He placed the necklace carefully upon the velvet case. His task was complete. The guests began to murmur, relief mingling with shock. Charles looked dazed, Mrs. Denham indignant, Alice tearful but lighter. Only Poirot remained serene, his moustaches immaculate, his satisfaction quiet. At last, he spoke once more. Miss Amis, you see, it is always the little things. A smear of soil, a lipstick stain, a perfume lingering where it should not be. The thief may be clever, but Hercule Poirot, he is more so. And now, the matter is resolved. He bowed modestly, his eyes twinkling. And perhaps, we may even remember it is still a birthday celebration. Let there be no more tears, only truth. For truth, Mesdames et Messieurs, is the finest jewel of all.